I'm Maureen Ballatori, and this is Spilled Salt, a podcast on the thrills and spills from the food, beverage, and agriculture industries. Today's guest is Nova Cadamatre. She is a consulting winemaker and a master of wine. She's based in the Finger Lakes, but she's known as a flying winemaker because she makes wine all over the United States. Nova's experience throughout her career has gone from learning hobby winemaking to working with very large global corporations. And today, she talks about those experiences as well as some nuggets on the current state of the industry and where the entire wine industry is going for the future, some of her predictions there. Enjoy the conversation. Hey, Nova, how are you?
Good. How are you, Maureen?
Good. Thanks so much for joining today. I wanted to start with, it is November 9th today, and I know you just finished harvest, and I know what that means a little bit. You know what that means a lot. And let's start there for you to tell everybody a little bit about what harvest season means.
Sure. So, grape harvest is kind of the culmination of all the hard work we've done in the vineyard throughout the whole year. And so it's Mother Nature's kind of timing. And so you're all in 100%, 7 days a week, a lot of times, and so there was a period between like end of September and like last weekend where I did not get a day off, so it's just, you just go, go, go. And the way I do things, I harvest both here in the East Coast and on the West Coast. And so I spend 2 to 3 days a week in Napa, California, and then the rest of the time here. And so I'm going back and forth all the time, and it's just insane. And I love it, but it's exhausting. So coming out of harvest now, it's really time to kind of reflect and go, okay, where is everything? What are we doing? My brain's starting to engage on things not related to harvesting grapes and fermenting wines, and going, oh, shoot, now here's all the to-do lists that I've been ignoring for the last 2 months that have to get done, but weren't like uber critical time sensitive like the grapes were.
Right. And what's the next step, right? So you got the grapes off the plant, you got them into the tanks, they're fermenting. How long do they typically sit there? Does that depend?
It depends. Yeah. So, okay. I mean, the reds are all done at this point. They're all pressed off. And so that's kind of a big sigh of relief. Everything's going through ML on the red side right now. So that's malolactic fermentation, which changes like the more tart malic acid, which is acid of apples, to more soft lactic acid, which is more of a milk acid. So you can see like the textural changes that would happen with that. Then the whites, we've still got a couple of Rieslings going through fermentation since those are more later ripening, but all of our early stuff is all done. The Chardonnay is all done. It's going through its ML, so it's just kind of we call it getting things put to bed, so to speak. Like once they're all done and everything's sulfured, that's when you really can go, okay, now we're at a good point. And at that point, I always say 85% of winemaking is done in like the first 2 weeks of when you and then the rest of the time is just not screwing up what you just did.
Right. Love that. So I wanted to start there because I know that that's been such a huge part of your life for the last month or handful of weeks. But I want to back up and kind of have you talk a little bit about your history. I know I've seen you call yourself, or other people call you, the flying winemaker. You reference that you work on the West Coast and the East Coast, but talk about your background a little bit.
Sure. So this was my 20th harvest. So that was kind of a big milestone for me. And, having been doing this as long as I have now, I've been able to be fortunate enough to work in a lot of different areas and a lot of different wineries, many different winemakers, lots of different varieties. And so, it's what I'm doing now as a consulting winemaker and also as an owner of my own wine company, really is a culmination of all those years of experience together. And the flying winemaker term is just a term for a winemaker that flies around the world and makes wine in multiple places, which is definitely what I've been doing. I'm not in multiple countries at this point, but just, bicoastal is kind of what I'm working on. So I have clients here in New York, I have a client in Ohio, and I have clients out in California and in Napa. And so, I just spend my time kind of managing all the different aspects of that.
Talk about keeping a lot of balls in the air.
And I have 2 kids, so that's another thing that is managed. So that's it's busy. It's never a dull
Hmm.
moment.
Yes. And what brought you to wine and winemaking? Where did your interest in that start?
Sure. So I did not grow up in a wine drinking family. I grew up in the
Mm.
Southeast back when like wine was the devil and, any sort of alcohol really.
Mm.
And now that's definitely changed in the Southeast. Like the perception of wine has been a much more positive thing over the last 10, 15 years. But yeah, so I came into it when I started dating my husband, whose
Mm.
family's Italian. And I started having dinners with their family, and they, had always had wine at the table, and that was just part of a meal. And so that's what really introduced me to it. And then Brian said one day when we were in college, "Oh, we should start a vineyard. My family in Italy did it. It can't be that hard." And turns out that like his family vineyard, it's a very extended family in Sicily, had like 4 rows in their backyard. So not necessarily like a massive vineyard, but enough to make some home wine. But he was thinking, oh yeah, if they did it in their backyard, that can't be that hard. And so I said, well, let me look into how hard it actually would be. And that's how I ended up getting into the wine industry. Is
Wow.
my major is actually viticulture, which is grape growing.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I married an Italian as well. And so my father-in-law also makes his own
Mm-hmm.
homemaking wine, and it is a big generational thing for them to
Yes.
pass down generation to generation. We also work with Billsboro Winery, also in the Finger Lakes here, and Vinny, that was his story too. He learned winemaking from his grandfather and
Mm-hmm.
wanted to, make that his job, and so he leaned into it and now does it full time. But you're doing it to a whole other degree, because you're not just making wine as a hobbyist, certainly
Right.
vastly beyond that, but you're
Yes.
also doing it for your own vineyards as well as other wineries around the country, and
Yes.
then maybe someday internationally too. How do you keep how do you balance all of that? How do you manage a vineyard on the other side of the country?
Well, the nice thing about my client in Napa is they've got an amazing vineyard manager. And so it's really the team, and it's having the
Mm-hmm.
team, because it's never just me. Like if people see that they think it's just me, but it's never just me. Let me just
Right.
clarify that. So having the right team around you is so, so critical, because I would absolutely fall flat on my face if I didn't have amazing, strong teams on both coasts to work with. And one of the things that I'm thinking about right now is I need to hire an assistant winemaker for my client in Ohio. And so it's like, again, having that team that's the people on the ground that
Mm-hmm.
can really make things happen. Clearly I'm not always pulling hoses anymore. I mean, I've done my share of it this harvest, that's for sure. But that's not my role 24/7 anymore. And so I need to make sure that I have people around me that are able to do the things that need to be done while I'm not there. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's been huge.
Mm-hmm. And how does your work now differ from, I know you spent some time at Constellation Brands. How does your day-to-day differ now from your time there?
Oh, it could not be more different. Like so my time with Constellation, for the most part, every day, I mean, during harvest was a little bit different. Like I'd go walking the vineyards in the morning and be in the office in the afternoon. But for the most part, it was a desk job. And
Mm.
it was very much like, oh, answer emails, attend meetings, these type of things. Whereas now I am all over the place, that I'm, out at wineries and out in vineyards. And I very rarely actually have time to sit down behind my computer and go through emails. I might have maybe 3 or 4 hours a week that I solely focus spending on emails, where that
Mhm.
used to be like 3 or 4 hours a day.
Mhm.
And so now I feel like I'm much more engaged in the physical winemaking process,
Mhm.
and know what's going on, and everywhere, and able to get my hands dirty a little bit more, which I really, really love.
Mhm. What are some of your favorite parts of the work that you're doing now, as opposed to getting your hands dirty?
Yeah, so I mean, I love there's so many aspects of what I do that I love. It's hard to pick, but I'm managing vineyards now, and
Mhm.
that has been really, really rewarding, because that was what I ultimately got me into this industry, is the
Mm.
process of growing a grapevine. And so being able to harvest our first fruit from vineyards that I've managed this year, that was a huge milestone, and very like full circle from some aspects. And so
Where you were involved in getting the plant in the ground, and this was your first year harvesting. Is that what you
no,
mean?
not in the ground. So we took over a vineyard, two vineyards actually this year, one for a client of mine and one that we leased for our company.
Mm-hmm.
And I managed both of those vineyards. And so again, we have a great vineyard team, and I just kind of go out there and say, okay, this is what we need to do today, and let's and but it was fruit that I called the shots on farming, and then I got to make wine from it, and
Cool.
that is something I've never done before, which was so rewarding. And then the other things that I love, I love working with my clients. I love seeing because pretty much all of my clients at this point are new to world brands. None of them are selling wine at this point. We're getting, things are in the bottle, things are in the tank, they're getting ready. We're getting the marketing plans together, and so they're all like brand new brands. And so next year is going to be such a huge year because all of these brands are now going to be hitting the market.
Yeah.
And so that's super exciting to see things come to fruition over, so many years of work because, once you see a wine brand hit a shelf, there's like at least 2 years of work that's been happening prior to that wine hitting that shelf. And so being able to see these things come to life is really exciting. And then one of my clients in Napa, we're planting his vineyard next year. And I got to pick all the clones for that and all the rootstocks. And it's a new vineyard in Napa County, which that doesn't happen.
Wow. Yeah.
So being able to be a part of that history of this is the virgin planting of this piece of ground and let's see what it does is really cool.
Yeah. We're really similar in that way because one of the reasons why we love working with brands that are in agriculture is because of that whole, you can decide what grows in the ground and how you plant it and how you harvest it and then what comes next. And so for us, a lot of the agricultural brands that we're working with, they're doing some sort of value added processing that maybe it turns into a consumer packaged good that's available on the shelf at a retail store. And to be able to literally walk in there and pick it up off the shelf and bring it home and bring it back to the office and show the team is a really cool, indescribable experience. Yeah.
It's a cool feeling.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I know that you are the first female master of wine, correct?
First female winemaker in the U.S.
Okay.
Wine.
Tell me about that experience. What was that like to get that?
That was a long slog of brutal work. So it took me 8 years. There are at the moment, I think about 420 masters of wine in the world. We just inducted 4 new ones last week. So I'm not 100% sure where we are numbers wise now, but that's still a relatively small number of people.
Yeah, 420 in the world. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, there are, it's roughly, I think 45% women and 55% men. So it's actually a pretty nice split between women and men, but because it has been so seen as like a trade, if you're in the sales or world, that's a certification you would get. So there are very few actual production people that go for the Master of Wine, which is how I ended up being the first female winemaker in the U.S. to get it.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I've heard this before about that there's not a lot of women leaders in wine, in the wine industry as a whole. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say that's true. I would say it's slowly changing. I see more and more women going into winemaking and being seen as being capable in production roles, and especially with the larger corporations, because they've put such a focus on, promoting equality and equity, and really embracing diverse leaders and diverse voices. So I see the larger corporations changing faster than the smaller family-owned companies. But it also depends on the region, because here in the Finger Lakes, I think we have a disproportionately higher percentage of women working in as owners or head winemakers than they do in California. Not that I have numbers to back that up, but I think if you looked at it as a whole, I think we're a relatively newer region, even though we've been growing wine since the 1800s. But from post-prohibition, we're a relatively new region, and right. I think we don't have as many of the old standby, you have to have a guy in charge, thoughts as maybe the California is fighting with, so yeah, I think there's definitely change.
Mhm.
but you don't see a lot of women at the very, very top,
Mhm.
and the ones that are, like, you think about Barbara Bank with Jackson family, like she's, definitely
Mm.
a strong woman leader. And, there's definitely others that are running, wine companies, but like the big companies are mostly still men.
Yeah. Yeah, and it kind of it just reminds me I just recently went to go see the Barbie movie with my daughter, and she walks into the big boardroom that's
Hmm.
full of men in suits, and she
Hmm.
says, "Where's the CEO? I want to meet her."
Hmm.
And then she's going down the line and down the line looking for any woman in leadership at Mattel, which I thought was just kind of, you know, anecdotally like a really interesting way for Mattel to poke fun at themselves,
Hmm.
and say we recognize this. But what it also comes down to is action. And so it's while it may be counterintuitive, I think it's great to hear that the corporations are moving first, right? Because they have the ability to, make those changes, and they can understand the importance of making sure that there's a diverse team in charge.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are some other like industry elements that you've seen change in your career of winemaking?
Industry elements. Wow. Well, I think just here in the Finger Lakes over the 20 years, I mean, my first harvest here in the Finger Lakes was in '04.
Hmm.
So I've been around this industry for quite a while now, and it is dramatically different now than it
Mm.
was back in '04. Like, the quality of wine overall as a region has really elevated. We're more well known from an
Hmm.
international perspective now as a quality wine region. And I just feel like there's just been so many people across the years that have worked so hard and kept kind of beating the drum and beating the drum.
Hmm.
And, I'm one of those people now beating the drum as well, and it's making sure that the world understands that
Hmm.
there's good wine to be made here.
Yeah.
Um, I do see a lot more embrace of diverse people in the industry, and that's been a relatively recent change. And I think it's been really, really good because we need different backgrounds and different thoughts of point of view and different ways to see things of how we sell to consumers, because not every consumer looks like us. Not every consumer looks like,
Hmm.
the white guy in the boardroom,
Hmm.
and so
Right.
we need to have those diverse opinions so that we know how to really reach consumers where they're at and how,
Hmm.
how we can best serve their needs.
Hmm. Yep. Couldn't agree more. What do you think are some of the changes that are coming down the pipeline in terms of what do you see continuing to happen in the future
Hmm.
of the wine industry, either just in the Finger Lakes or in the industry as a whole?
Well, I think climate change is something we're all having to reckon with, and it's
Hmm.
happening now. Like,
Yeah.
everybody kind of thinks of climate change as something that's going to happen in the future,
Yeah.
or we're going to be impacted by it in the future at some point. But if you're in agriculture, it's happening right now.
Right.
And we're having to make changes of how we farm and adapt, especially in California. Now we're doing a lot of work with canopy management and things like that, so that the fruit can stay protected from the sun when it gets really hot. The wildfires are an issue. So
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many things that have happened in the last 5 to 10 years that are really being driven by this change in our climate that we're having to adapt to quite quickly as an
Hmm.
agricultural community, and that's globally.
Yeah.
The industry is having to grapple with that. Like, the flooding in Germany was just tragic,
Hmm.
and all these major storms that are hitting France, and the hail in
Hmm.
Burgundy, and there's like every single wine region, there's something. Like,
Yeah.
it's not all the same problem, but it's
Right.
something being driven to an extreme that
Yeah.
we're now having to adapt to.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the biggest issue there.
Hmm.
I think something that is a very interesting development in the industry right now is everybody's going, oh, people are drinking less wine. People are drinking less wine. There's this
Yeah.
panic about people drinking less wine. But if you really look at the data and you look at the breakdown of what part of the industry is shrinking and what part of the industry is growing, what's shrinking is the stuff at the low end. Anything less than $11 a bottle. Yeah, people are not drinking that. You know why? Because it just doesn't taste good. There are better options.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily see this as a bad thing. It's like, if you're going to put something in your mouth and put something in your body, have it be a pleasant, positive experience, you know?
Yeah.
And, you know, what people are doing is they are looking at all of their options for beverages, be it wine, be it craft beer, be it spirits, be it
Hmm.
non-alcoholic options, and they're making choices, and they're saying, I want to have a great experience, and what is going to be that experience tonight? And I think instead of being panicked about this, we need to really embrace this movement towards giving consumers what they want. And the good news is they're buying them at higher price points. Are they buying
Yeah.
the same volume? No. But the
Mm.
value, where the market is much at a higher price point than it was 10 years ago. And I think there's a lot of panic around the fact that people are drinking less, but they are drinking better. And so I don't necessarily see that
Mhm.
necessarily as a bad thing. Now, if you're a grape grower in the Central Valley of California, yeah, that might be a major problem for you. Um,
Because they're often growing the grapes for the
yes,
lower value wine.
exactly,
Mm.
exactly. But you know, there's huge competition in that area for almonds, for pistachios.
Hmm.
Like it's going to take some adaptation, and but there are whole companies that have based their model on we're gonna be doing the box wine at the
Hmm.
entry level price points, and those are the people that are super scared right now because they've been doing the volume, but that's also the part of the market that's shrinking. And so I see it as a real fundamental shift in how customers are approaching wine and
Hmm.
consuming wine. I don't necessarily see it that as a bad thing, you know,
Hmm.
because I've always been one to um, encourage moderation.
Hmm.
And for me, I'd rather have one really amazing glass of wine every 2 weeks than of just mediocre one every night. And
Hmm.
that's always just been my philosophy. And so I'm kind of seeing more and more people adapting to
Yeah.
that same thought process.
Yeah, and I love that perspective, and I think that that's consistent with a lot of different aspects of food and beverage, right?
Mm-hmm.
We work with a lot of premium artisanal brands that
Mm-hmm.
have something special and it's at a higher price point.
Yeah.
And you can be there, but you have to have a strategy that aligns with that concept that you're talking about
Yes.
of you're not going to sell as much, which has always been the case, right?
Right.
You either have a volume play or you have a premium play,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not the same. And how much you sell is never going to be consistent either. So I
Exactly.
think that that's a great perspective to have on the winery industry as a whole, the wine industry as a whole. But I think it's also could be extrapolated to many aspects of food and beverage.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. I mean, customers have more choices now than they ever have.
Hmm.
And I think it's a really exciting time to
Hmm.
be a customer in the food and bev space, you know, because you have so many things that you could explore, and that's exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the other thing too, to your point about mentioning that if those farmers in the Central Valley are not able to have an outlet for their product any longer, right? That there are other things that could be grown on that land, those pivots are never easy decisions. But that's one of the reasons, again, why I love agriculture, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
because the possibilities are endless. You can
Mm-hmm.
farm a different way, you can farm a different thing. And again, very easy for me to say, I'm not talking about personally ripping out a bunch of vineyards in my backyard, but as a whole, that farmland is highly valuable
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of different purposes. Yeah. Tell me a story about one of your favorite experiences from the industry, just in your career, like something that happened or someone that you worked with or something that you got to have a hand in creating that was a really special moment for you.
Well, I mean, I think one of the really special moments for me had nothing to do with me actually as a winemaker, but had to do with me studying for the Master of Wine. And
Mhm.
the first year I was in the Master Wine program, they always do what they do is call us a stage one Bordeaux trip. And you have to apply to be accepted onto it. And then have to pay for your plane ticket to get to Bordeaux. And then the chateau in Bordeaux sponsor it and they cover
Mhm.
everything else. So I applied to be on this trip and I got on it, flew to Bordeaux, and it was 30 something people on the bus, and we were going around to all these different like we hit probably 4 chateaux per day. It was
Wow.
maybe a 4 or 5 day long trip, but the last chateau we hit was Chateau Margaux. And this was in 2009. It was early 2009 because they were just getting ready to do the '08 En Primeur. And Paul Pontalier, who's since passed, was our tour guide, and he walked us all around the cellar. And I ended up getting able to sit next to him at dinner that night. And
Mm-hmm.
I have just a notebook that I had with me, and there's like 3-4 pages of just quotes from Paul Pontalier in that notebook from that trip. And one of the things he said, which is very poignant now that he's gone, is that he said, "I'm making wines that will outlive me. I'm making wines that will be here far beyond my time on earth, and people will still be enjoying them long after I'm gone." And he said, and that's my immortality. And as a winemaker, like, that really struck home to me, is like, that's our legacy. That's what we're
Yeah,
leaving.
that was the word that came to mind for me too when you were talking about that.
Yeah, and it's that, I want to make sure that the wines that I'm making are worthy of that. I
Mm.
don't want people to look at my wines and, if somebody keeps something for 40 years or 50 years, like, I want to make sure that they can see what it was, even if it's not fully at the same level, or maybe it is beautiful in 40, 50 years. So
Yeah.
I try to think about, not so much, because most wine is drunk within 24 hours, 48 hours of buying it, but
Mhm.
not all of it is. And so
Right.
those ones that get stashed in a cellar somewhere, and somebody
Mhm.
picks up and they go, "Oh, what was this?" And I want to think that, after I've left the industry, or after I'm no longer on the world, that my wines will still be around and people will still be enjoying them.
Yeah. And that aligns with that experience that you're talking about creating too, and the industry moving more toward premium experiences that people can really enjoy that moment with their food and beverage and the people and the memories that all surround that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the concept of it's not many, but it's one special thing.
Yes.
And so that legacy bottle that
Mm-hmm.
will outlive you is going to be something that somebody pulls off the shelf one day and has that same kind of shared experience,
Mm-hmm.
even though you'll be in totally different times. That's what a great
Absolutely.
concept.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, last question for you. What's next for you?
Oh, I don't know. I'm going away this weekend. I'm going on vacation. I'm not going to
Good for
work this
you.
weekend, so I'm very
Well
excited about
deserved. Yep.
that. Yeah, what's next? I ask myself that a lot, because I'm been about 2 years, almost 2 years, in this new iteration of my life, with not working full time for somebody else. I'm loving it, but there's always the kind of, where are the brands going? Where's the company going? Our company's growing, quickly, and it's always a struggle, and a good problem to have, but also a struggle to go, how do you manage the growth in a smart way but take advantage of the opportunities, and
Mhm.
so, yeah, I don't know really what's next, because I've been thinking about that a lot, and trying to develop that. Okay, where do we want to be? Getting
Mhm.
ready to come into 2024 planning,
Mhm.
and sales planning, and visioning, and all of that. And I have a vision board that I drew out, year and a half ago or so, for like where we want to be in like 10 years.
Yeah.
But where we are now versus where we're going to be in like 2 years from now, like,
Yeah.
that's always the kind of the murky gray area. You've got the
Mhm.
long-term goals and the immediate goals, but that,
Right.
like, midterm goal thing is always a little bit challenging to figure out.
Yeah. Yeah. Same is true for me. I would imagine too that now that you're through harvest, you're through the busiest time of the year, and you can kind of take a step back. You can take, your vacation and rest a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Include some time for reflection. That's the time where some of the brilliance and visioning all starts to come together, because you have time to give space to your
Yes.
mind to be
Yes.
open to thinking in that way, instead of, I got to do this with the grapes, and I got to do this with the tanks, and I got to do these
Yes.
with the crates, and make sure all these people are have what they need from me, and all of
Mm-hmm.
those things. So I'm excited for you and the opportunity that is ahead of you with continuing the great trajectory of your career that you've been on. So
Thank you. Yeah, I always take the time during the winter to write. I write a lot during the winter, and I have been working on a book, and my goal is to finish the book this winter, and so that's the goal. So yeah, we'll see where that goes.
And the book is about?
It's about overcoming failure and life lessons that have led me to being able to be gritty and strong and being able to get through things that are hard, basically. And I've had a lot of people ask me, especially through the MW program, because I failed that exam so many times. Failed it 5 times, and then they kicked me out, and then I had to come back and pass it the 6th time. And so the resilience that was required to get through that, a lot of people have asked me, like, how did you do, and where did you find the gumption and all that? And so I started writing the book for those people that wanted to know. And because it's not an easy answer. It's well, I've been through this my whole life, and these are the things I've learned, and this is what kind of gave me that background to be able to keep going. And so I feel like that book needs to be out there.
I love it. Well, once you've got that done, or you're ready to, nearly finish it up and start getting it out into the world, we'll have you back on the podcast, and you can tease a little bit more about that, because it sounds fascinating.
Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for taking the time today, Nova. Really great conversation. I appreciate it. Thank you for listening to Spilled Salt. I'm Maureen Ballatore. For more information about the podcast, visit www.29designstudio.com. If you have questions for me, you can submit them through the contact form on the website. Be sure to like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode.